Hello and welcome to the Backlot 605 box office. I am your host, Brian Mensing, and joining me as always is my co-host Derrick Veurink. How you doing tonight?
Good, Brian. You?
I guess I can't complain. It's been a relatively busy weekend, away from the theaters, actually in the theaters. So we actually
Yep.
had a couple new movies this week here. We actually get to talk about some new stuff going on, right?
Yeah. And they did well too, so that's even more exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. Actually, there was one of them I was wanting to go to, and then it literally came two up. I'm like, do I want to? I don't know. And that is actually going into actually our number one movie. That is actually Uncharted, coming in at number one at $51.00 million for the 4-day weekend. Because I'm assuming this is going to take Monday in consideration.
Yep. This includes President's Day because we have those numbers, or at least the current estimates. And
Mm-hmm.
since they're makes big numbers even bigger, I thought, why the heck not? So,
Absolutely. Yeah, this is that one where it's like, I've been kind of curious about this. Sony's been trying to make this movie for like 10 years now.
close to
And
15, actually.
yeah, and all of a sudden, like, weekend comes around and I'm like, oh, I might actually have time but do I really want to go? And maybe part of that is that I made the mistake and I saw the when the embargo lifted for the reviews and Rotten Tomatoes wasn't looking so hot for it. I think it was like at a 40% or something like that. I think when I looked.
That,
But I mean, so
that's,
far, I mean, it must not be doing too bad numbers wise and the B plus cinema score.
yeah. I mean, I just checked Rotten Tomatoes. It is at 40% with the critics.
Mm-hmm.
A B plus cinema score for a movie like this, I think, is fine. I think Sony would have liked to have like an A minus at the very least, but
Mm-hmm.
still, I this movie. I mean, to put it in context, I think the prognosticators going into the weekend were saying, well, if it got to like 35, maybe even 40, we would consider that to be a success given the circumstances.
Yeah.
So for it to overperform and do 51 million in 4 days is pretty good. Um, I think a big part of that is, Sony kind of timed this pretty well to have this come out, a couple months after No Way Home opens. They're kind of really banking on, like, is this the movie that they can leverage Spidey to put Tom Holland into superstardom outside of that franchise?
Mm-hmm.
And this movie has easily done it.
Yeah, I would definitely think that was Sony's angle with it going, okay, Spider-Man's starting to die down a little bit. We've made our money and whatnot, but let's not make sure that people understand that Tom Holland is in two movies in the theater at the same time.
Yep, yep,
Then you're like, if you're Spidey'd out, you got Uncharted now.
exactly. And again, this is in a pretty good position. It's got basically a couple of weeks where it'll be number one at the box office before the Batman comes out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the way things are setting up here, I think it's going to easily coast to at least 100 million when all is said and done, which
Yeah.
again, for a movie that Sony's been trying to make happen for many, many, many years. I mean, I was actually doing the research, and Sony actually signed Tom Holland for this nearly 5 full years ago, right before the first Spider-Man Tom Holland movie came out.
I immediately think of that. I'm like, had he hit puberty by then?
So yeah, at least it's paying off. It'll do just fine. I'll
Mm-hmm.
be curious, if they'll technically say, "Yep, Uncharted 2 is happening," because the movie does technically set up a sequel at the end. I
Mm-hmm.
won't say much more than that, but big surprise, I know.
Right.
So we'll see how soon Sony talks about that, and if it takes, hopefully, it takes a lot less than 15 years to get a sequel out, but who knows?
Yeah, because then at that point, Tom Holland will play the Mark Wahlberg character, and then we'll just have to have somebody else to bring in as the Tom Holland person. Yeah, I get it. Absolutely. Um, I know it. I don't know. I'm still on the fence. But I'm assuming overall, I mean, for being a video game movie, it's more or less it's a popcorn movie. It's just there to, like you said, to be the quote unquote driving vehicle for Tom Holland, the action star.
Yeah, I mean, it passes 2 hours just fine. I don't think it's spectacular by any means. I mean, obviously, the Uncharted games are all about like, yeah, we're trying to do the Indiana Jones riff and stuff inside a video game. So
Hmm.
when you have a movie based on a video game that's based on movies, it's going to feel a little bit been there, done that. But, the time passes by. There's some fun, there's some laughs, there's a couple decent action sequences. It's just okay. So
Oh, fair enough. All right, we go into number 2. We have the Channing Tatum starring and co-directing Dog coming in number 2, $18.05 million. I did see your quick little like th- let there be more of this is that you felt this was actually better than you expected it to be.
yeah, and I think a big part of this was, if you've seen the trailer, it sets up kind of a, a basic, although a little bit kind of a broad kind of, human and dog buddy comedy road
Mm,
trip kind of
mhm.
movie. Certainly like there, but if you actually watch the movie, and I just saw this movie, just a handful of hours ago as of the time we're recording this, it's actually a little bit more. I mean, it is those elements, but it's also a little bit more of a serious movie at times because both Channing Tatum and the dog Lulu in this movie, they're both, army veterans. They've seen rough times in the combat field. They're both kind of still coping with their trauma and things like that. And the movie addresses those in a fairly serious manner. But you don't get any of that in the trailer because the trailer kind of makes it like, oh, the dog is tearing apart Channing Tatum's vehicle. Oh, the dog is running away. And then also there's like a good 20% of that trailer that's dedicated to a sequence in which Channing Tatum pretends to be a blind person to get a free
Mhm.
hotel room, which seems kind of broad in and of itself. But if you watch it in the movie, there is actually kind of a dark ending to that sequence. I won't say
Mm.
anymore. But just to let it know that, there is a bit more meat on the bone than you would think. And of course, it is actually kind of a little bit of a crowd pleaser in that regard. At the end of my screening, the audience actually applauded, which took me by
Wow.
surprise.
Especially for like a movie like this, like an Avengers Endgame or something like that, it would be something to be expected, but not like a movie like this. So you called me intrigued now.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a pretty solid word of mouth hit. Again, this has an A- cinema score, which you don't get that easily unless you're doing a pretty fair number of things right. So
Mhm.
I think this, I mean, I kind of only expected like maybe 10, 11, 12 million out of this movie this weekend, but the fact that it made 18 is actually pretty stunning. And a part of me wonders if it's, I mentioned this last week was Channing Tatum's been away from the big screen for a while. So I wonder if
Mhm.
there's that urge, to like, hey, he's finally got a movie out. I'm going to go see that. It kind of sets up a good narrative for what I've termed his comeback year, as it were.
Right.
So
Yeah, definitely. I know I was actually looking at iTunes and clearly they're thinking the same thing too, because like everything Channing Tatum is like, oh, here's a bunch of movies he's already done that are on sale. You need to buy these movies.
of course, strike while the iron's hot.
Absolutely. All right, we go into number 3. Speaking of the Holland, no Spider-Man: No Way Home, $8.8 million with a whole whopping 4% drop in its 10th week. I mean, what more can we really say of, one of the greatest, grossing movies of all time?
Well, there's a couple things. First off, I did want to call out that last Monday on Valentine's Day, No Way Home officially beat Avatar. So it is now the
Ooh.
third biggest grossing movie of all time in the United States. And of course, it's added another 10 million on top of that. So the question we're starting to ask ourselves right now is, can this movie actually leg out at this point to actually getting to the 800 million mark, which is certainly doable potentially. Um, because again, it's number three after 10 weeks, which, it's beat a bunch of other movies to get to that point because now it's topped Jackass and Death on the Nile and Marry Me in the
Mhm.
weekend list. So it's fine. Another reason that I think Sony is convinced it can get to that point is you'll notice I've updated the digital release date because last week the Microsoft Store leaked that Sony actually pushed the digital release out another 3 weeks from March 1st to March 22nd.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so certainly Sony's becoming more and more confident of trying to keep this in theaters, possibly to get to that point.
Sure.
Um, or at least kind of milk it for all it's worth. Again, next week will do probably fine. Certainly, the next big test for this movie is once the Batman comes out in a couple weeks, and all
Yeah,
the comic book folks go to that as their comic book movie of choice. That's probably where we'll see a drop off. But in all honesty, it still might actually stay in the top five here for a number of weeks yet, simply because there's not that much coming out. So
yeah, and it's the kind of movie too that even with the Batman being there, just strategically where it's at, it's gonna be that one where like somebody's gonna be like, oh, I can't get to see Batman, so if I'm gonna go see a superhero movie, I still have Spider-Man to go to.
that's fair.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
All right. Number four, we have Death on the Nile, as you mentioned, at $7.19 million, taking a 54% drop in its second week. So, I mean, a pretty standard drop, I would say, from week to week, from a first to a second week. Granted, it's not Spider-Man.
No, I mean, this is, yeah, I mean, at this point, you're going to have big drop offs on a second weekend, no matter
Yeah,
what. One thing that probably is worth calling out is last weekend, this movie had all like the large format screens, it had some IMAX screens, it was on our Cinemark XD screen. And when you're on those large format screens, you have a premium ticket price where they could
true.
out another $2 or $3. This weekend, of course, it lost all those screens to Uncharted, so it's already going to lose a little bit of oomph just because of that. So there's that. I mean, it probably will stabilize pretty well next week. Well, maybe who knows if it'll even stay in the top five next week. We'll get to that.
Hmm.
But, you're absolutely right. This is just something that happens with any movie, regardless of what its theatrical path is. These movies
Yeah.
just take a big hit on weekend two just because of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it's like I think once we start finally getting into the stabilized movies are just coming out, we're not necessarily worrying about pushbacks and stuff like we've been dealing for the last 2 years.
Nope.
That, we're just going to get back into those routines of, oh, yeah, the next week it's between 45 to 65% drop from week one to week two. So
Yep.
that's, and this is exactly where I see with this. So I don't knock this as anything to do with the movie itself, just more of we're starting to see the normalcy come back to the theater in terms of from week to week.
Exactly.
All right. And then number five, the aforementioned Jackass Forever coming in at $6.2 million with only a 37% drop. This, honestly, for the sake of the percent drop for this one here, I'm not surprised. Just because the people that would want to go see this movie, they all went to go see it. Obviously, first week,
Yep.
obviously it was going to take its hit and whatnot. But there are going to be those guys that are going to be like, I need to go see that again.
I mean, it still to an extent is the de facto comedy option out there.
True.
So I think that helps out quite a bit. Obviously, the people who have talked about it have said like, "Oh yeah, we laughed our butts off, we enjoyed it." That's certainly going to spread to other folks as well. I mean, we're coming in at nearly 50 million thus far. Again, as we talked about last week, it's already well beyond made its budget back because I think it
Hmm.
only maxed out at 10 million. Again, it's successful, and there's really not much more to be said about that. It did what it needed to do, and it gave us a lot of joy, and we're all the better for it. In fact, uh, actually, I gotta show it here because right when I got home tonight, FedEx actually dropped off my Jackass T-shirt that I got
Oh,
through
gee.
Cinemark Rewards. So yeah, I was happy about
Oh,
that.
jeez. A Jackass T-shirt, because everybody needs one of those.
I know, but hey, I need to do something with my Cinemark points. So there you go.
You are correct. I know every time I go on there never is any physical rewards. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, I guess. It's
They
always
they go
digital.
they always go fast. I can honestly tell you that. So
All right. So with that being said, our top five, we have number one coming in, Uncharted, $51 million. Number two, Dog, $18.05 million. Number three, Spider-Man No Way Home, $8.8 million. Number four, Death on the Nile, at 7.19. And Jackass Forever coming at 6.2. Spider-Man, the movie that just won't go away. I'm just kidding. I'm okay
it
with that.
It won't.
All right. So next week, one of these I'm really, really looking forward to, and it's not Hotel Transylvania Transformania. Um, is Studio 666. It just looks stupid funny. Not Jackass stupid funny, but
A
just
different, a
because
different flavor, yes.
a different horror comedy from the guys in Foo Fighters, and I'm excited for this, and I really need to buy a ticket for this.
Yeah, I'm very curious what kind of business this movie is going to do, because
Hmm.
it kind of exploded on the scene kind of by surprise because the Foo Fighters actually didn't announce it until they said, "Oh, here's a trailer. We filmed this movie in secret. Here it is." Um, and certainly the buzz about like the Foo Fighters are making this horror comedy hybrid. You know, I have no idea what kind of business this will do, but I think there's
Hmm.
probably going to be enough curiosity to kind of get some butts in the seats. So I'll be very curious to see how well this does next weekend.
Oh, I agree too. And I think because of where they filmed this and the location for this movie, I think is the reason why the Foo Fighters were able to get away with making this movie and nobody knowing about it.
Yep,
Because the movie takes place at the mansion, which
where they recorded
is
the album.
where they recorded the album, but yeah, it's a music studio owned by Rick Rubin. So the idea that there's going to be film crews, whether you're documenting the album process, whatever the case is, you're at a music studio. These guys are a band, whatnot. Nobody would have been of the wiser, being like, oh, they're filming a movie there. No idea, which I absolutely love that. So I'm definitely stoked for that one.
Yeah,
And then we got Siriano. Wow.
Cyrano.
Cyrano, yes. Oh, this is the Peter Dinklage movie.
It is, yes, finally
Oh.
coming out. It's been they've kind of been pushing off this release for quite a while, but
Mhm.
now that this movie is officially an Oscar nominee because it does have a Best Costume Design Oscar nomination, they're finally giving it the momentum and saying, "Here, we're finally putting it into theaters." So the adaptation of Cyrano de Bergerac with Peter Dinklage as Cyrano. Oh, and also, by the way, it's a musical too. So
Oh,
very
really?
yes, and it's from director Joe Wright, the guy who did the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice and the original movie Hannah, and most recently Darkest Hour, the movie that won Gary Oldman his Oscars. So very
Hmm.
curious what this will be as well. You know, obviously the last kind of major Oscar player, even though it only got one minor Oscar nomination, but so it is.
Yeah. No, yeah, yeah. You definitely got me curious, especially with going against like the heavy hitters like Uncharted and stuff like that. Studio 666 and Cyrano both. I'm sitting here, I'm kind of wondering how that's going to go. So next week will be an interesting conversation. I think whether or not, hopefully, we even get to talk about these two.
Yes.
And then we have Hotel Transylvania Transformania, which is a movie that you and I both agree they probably should have just released this in theaters anyway instead of selling to Amazon, because there's been this gap in the kids animation and the kids movies since Sing. Like there
Yep.
should this should have been released a month ago easily.
Perhaps I'm this one kind of came up by surprise because I was checking the Cinemark app showtimes last week, and all of a sudden this popped up at both theaters here in Sioux Falls, and I'm like, okay, I understand why they're putting it out because there is
We
that,
need the content.
and yep, but also I can understand maybe why they had to hold off because obviously the big target with this movie was for it to be an Amazon Prime exclusive, and now that they've kind of come 6 weeks since then, um, I can honestly see why they're doing it. It's not clear to me if this is Amazon doing this theatrical release or if it's Sony.
Okay.
The reason I bring it up is if it's Amazon, they won't do like any official box office numbers. We might get like some unofficial estimates. If it's Sony doing it, because they retain some theatrical and home video rights on these movies when they sell them to streamers, we might get a number. But I'm going to be curious what kind of numbers it can pull because, again, families might be desperate and a good number of those families might not even have Amazon Prime. So it might be new to them to begin with. So
True.
if it did well enough, maybe that could even crack the top 5. But again, we'll see.
Well, I guess it'll be kind of interesting to see how this all plays out for next week here. We'll see if we get to talk about any of these movies. Maybe we'll just have to talk about them just because we want to talk about new movies.
I think Studio 666 at the least can crack through that top 5. Once enough drop off will probably happen on Death of the Nile or maybe even Jackass, where Dave Grohl can just pop on through. We'll see.
I mean, the Foo Fighters do have a lot of pull. I mean, they are the Foo Fighters after all.
Exactly.
So, all right. So that has been our box office for this week. Excuse me. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd HQ, all at Backlot 605. If you want to hear more in regards to the podcast, you can check us out on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Amazon, and our pretty faces on YouTube. Want to support the show and get the bonus content? Be sure to check us out at patreon.com/backlot605. What other fun stuff do we got going on there, Derek?
Yeah. So this week on the main show, you guys will be wrapping up Viola Davis month with her Oscar-winning turn in 2016's Fences. And then on the Patreon, you guys will be contributing to the online discourse by talking about the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie that just debuted on Netflix this weekend.
Party bus for sure. About the party bus. That is the party bus. Yes. Awesome. Well, that again has been our box office this week. Be sure to check us out, every week, every Monday, as we drop our little tidbits of what's going on, and we will check you out here next week.
Bye.
Bye.